don't we? We have to wait for a minute. We've got a nice big crowd this morning.
Hello, Warren. Right. How's Angela?
Yeah, morning. Yeah, very good. How are you doing?
Good. Say hi.
Yes. And
okay. Good morning, all. I'd like to first, before we start recording, first of all, I would like to dedicate this shiur to Johnny Halpin's mum's memory. Johnny has yortzeit for his mother tonight, Ha'isha Rivka Bat Reb Shimon, and we dedicate the learning in this shiur to her memory. And I'd also, at the same time, like to welcome Eva Weiss, who's just joined us for the first time. And she is a friend of Sharon's. So she's a friend of Sharon's, then she's a friend of all of ours too. And she has just come into our community recently. She's coming up to the end of her year of saying Kaddish, I think for her mother, which I think ends on Thursday, or Wednesday night or Thursday. Eva, if you want to unmute yourself and tell us the name of your mother, then we can dedicate the learning to her as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I really am grateful for that. My mother's name was Yudit Bat Yakir V'Chava.
Okay, so we dedicate the learning to the memory of Yehudit Bat Yakir V'Chava as well. Hopefully, the learning that we do in this shiur today will be an aliyah for their neshamot. And again, just before we start, since we've got a nice cross-sectional crowd here, I just want to ask you, I don't want you to tell me now, but I'd like you to think about this. And if you are interested, send me a WhatsApp. The shiur that we did on Sunday, which was about one word about prayer, seems to have struck a chord with quite a lot of people. I've had quite a few messages from various people that the stuff that we talked about, particularly about the Modim prayer, the prayer of thanksgiving in the Shemona Esrei, people seem to have struck a chord, and people have told me that their davening was better, particularly in the bracha of Modim, which is great. I'm very happy to hear that, of course, because it makes it all worthwhile. But it made me think that perhaps it would be a good idea to think about doing another shiur, a separate shiur, where we could go through the tefillah of the Shemona Esrei at our usual enormous pace, and go through it carefully, word by word and idea by idea, and then if the few minutes that we spent on Modim had an effect on Modim, then maybe if we did that, we would all benefit from understanding and appreciating the Shemona Esrei prayer a little bit more. So I'm thinking about doing that as a separate shiur, obviously under the Techelet banner, which we will offer it to all our Techelet friends as well. And I'm thinking about a Tuesday, because that seems to be a day where we don't have anything going on in our group. I'm sure you've all got things going on in your own lives, but in our particular group, we haven't got anything on a Tuesday. So I was thinking about a Tuesday, and I would like you who would be interested to, I'm going to send a message out to this end anyway, but those of you who would be interested, if you would just send me a WhatsApp with the time of day on a Tuesday that would suit you, because I'm aware that some people prefer the morning, some people prefer the evenings, and once I've got a feel for what people want, makes no difference to me really when I do it. So I try and accommodate those who the majority view. So the idea is that we do a shiur on the Tefillah of Shemona Esrei, go through it in detail, look at the language, look at the words, look at where we've seen the words elsewhere, look at the meaning, look at what the ideas of the Anshe Knesset Agdolah were when they instituted this particular prayer, and see if we can improve our own davening as a result. So think about that, and then please send me an email or a WhatsApp, whichever suits you, to tell me what your thoughts are on that. Okay, let's start the Gemarrah share. So we are in Gemarrah Sanhedrin. For those of you who are first timers, Eva, we're in Gemarrah Sanhedrin. I'm going to put the text up on the screen in a moment. Just to give you a little background, we've been going 15 months in the shiur, and we're on page 8. So we don't go very fast. But nevertheless, what we lack in speed, we make up for in quality, we hope. So we are in the middle of a section which, let's get this up on the screen first of all. Let me get it up on the screen. There we go, page
41.
41, thank you, Johnny. Right, okay, let me share the screen with you. There it is.
Have you marked Marcel's homework yet?
Yes, well, I'm going to go to Marcel's homework. I sent it all out to you. I hope you looked at it. We're going to talk about that right now. So we're on page Daf Chet Amud Aleph. You can see there in the top left-hand corner. And we are in the middle of looking at three particular verses from the book of Dvarim, chapter 1, verses 16 to 18, which we'll look at in a minute. Last week, we finished on this part here at the top of this page, that the concept that Howard Epstein, who's not with us this morning, has brought up last week, which is the concept of justice is blind, meaning that if you have any kind of knowledge of the litigants, then there is a danger that you might, as a judge, favor or unfavor one or other of the litigants. And this Gemara tells us that you should excuse yourself from hearing that case. And it gave us an example of Rav, who had a case come before him where one of the litigants was somebody who had hosted him in his house. And therefore he said, I can't judge this case because I am in some ways beholden unto you because you have been my host. And he said to Rav Kahana, you go and do it. And we wanted to know who this Rav Kahana was and what his relationship was with Rav. And we gave that job to Marcel. And Marcel duly did his homework very nicely. And I sent it all out to you. Let's just get it up on the screen. I hope that I'll be able to get this up on the screen. I don't know whether you can see that yet. I might have to unshare and share. Can you see Marcel's homework on the screen or not? No. Okay, so I have to stop share and reshare. Okay, don't worry. It's coming up. Here we go. Here it is. Right. There it is. So this was Marcel's homework, which he's done. Gets 10 out of 10 for presentation. Because you can read it, which was better than my homework ever was. Nobody could ever read my homework. Sorry about the background noise. It's the hailstones for those that are not in our area. So it seems that there were a number of Rav Kahanas, 6 according to this, and they all were Amoraim living in Bavel. Rav Kahana Kama. Kama means... What does the word kama mean?
How?
Sorry, Johnny?
How?
Yes,
Kama.
that's true. That's with a kaf. This is with a kuf. With a kuf.
Does it mean like?
No, that's also with a kaf. Oh, Howard's joined us. There you are. I thought you weren't coming, Howard. It's nice to see you. Right.
I got time off for good behaviour.
What about the Gemarrah Bava Kama? What does that mean?
First.
We have Bava Kama.
It mean many.
We have-
Bava Kama is the gate of many, isn't it? Many gates.
Okay, no, not quite. You're right about Bava
First.
means gate. We have Bava Kama.
First.
We have Bava Metzia. And we have Bava Batra.
David's
So,
saying first.
first, that's right. You can
No,
work
not
it
me.
out.
David said it, not me.
You know Bava Metzia. Metzia means the middle. Emtsa is the middle. So Bava Kama is the first gate. Bava Metzia is the second gate. And Bava Batra is the last gate. So the word Kama means first. Okay? Means first. So Rav Kahana Kama, as Marcel has written here, was the first Rav Kahana. He was the first Rav Kahana Kama, first. Then we have Rav Kahana Bar Malkiyu, who was a teacher of Rav, and some say they were the same person. And Marcel says it's probably safe to say that this was the Amorah who Rav asked to be his replacement. Another Rav Kahana was a stepson of Rav. So Marcel's right that it's unlikely to be him, because if Rav was had a sort of a connection, then so would his stepson. So he wouldn't ask him to do it. And Rav Kahana, a fourth generation Amorah, was a student of Rav. Possibly it was him if he was a big student, but I think that it probably was Rav Kahana Kama, who was an established sage at the time of Rav, who this Gemarrah is referring to. So thank you for that, Marcel. Yes, Marcel, do you want to expand on
yes,
that?
it's quite a coincidence that at the shiur, a Hebrew shiur, Gemarrah shiur on brachot, which I attended last night, every Monday night. No, Monday night it was, not last night. The day of Wednesday, Monday night. The same two characters, the same two Amorim appeared, Rav and Rav Kahana.
So they're obviously contemporaries, and since that our Gemarrah says that Rav gave the job to Rav Kahana to do, they were obviously not only contemporaries, but in the same area as well. And in fact, my bit of research indicated that they were in the same Bet Din, they were in the same sort of city, if you like. And Rav just said, okay, this case is for you to hear because I have a connection. So thank you for doing that, Marcel. That was enlightening to us all. So let's carry on now. Let's get the Gemarrah back on the screen, and we'll carry on where we left off.
Marcel.
Yes.
Just as a matter of interest, were you learning the famous Gemarrah in Brachos near the end in the last chapter?
It is in. Yes, I think so. I think that's what it was. Yes.
Yeah. Where it's Rav Kahana learning about marital relationships from Rav.
Yes.
By
under the bed.
By staying under his bed at night.
Yes, he hid under the bed.
Excuse me, David Mark. This is a family shiur. This is not past the watershed yet. We can't talk about these things in this shiur. But it's actually very interesting that
even if it's Rav and Rav Kahana. Even
if it's Rav and Rav Kahana, it just shows you what they got up to. But anyway, if you're interested in that story, everybody, you can go and look it up. It's interesting to find out how they didn't have textbooks on marital relationships in those days. So it seems that the students used to go to their rabbis' houses and hide under their beds to learn about marital relationships. I will say no more. If you're interested, you can look it up. It's in Gemarrah Brachos. Okay, So let's get back to the matters in hand. We are at one of these little symbols over here, this little funny looking S, which indicates to us that we are starting on a slightly different tack now. It's almost like a new paragraph. We're still in our verses in Dvarim, which I'm going to share with you on the screen now, I hope. Can you see Dvarim on the screen? No. Okay, so I have to stop the share and reshare. Every time I go a different one, I have to reshare it. Doesn't matter. I've got the hang of it now. There we are. Now you
Sorry, Johnny, just a very quick one.
Yeah.
Johnny, a very quick one. Going back to Rabbi Kahana, if looking at what you actually wrote, it can't be the same Rabbi Kahana who was under the bed. It must have been another Rabbi Kahana, because this Rabbi Kahana seemed to be older than Rav.
Yes, you're right. The Rav Kahana who was under the bed was probably the 4th generation one who was a student of Rav. If you have a look, I sent it out on the Gemarrah sheet. I sent Marcel's homework on the Gemarrah WhatsApp group. If you have a look at it, you'll see that he gives us one Rav Kahana who was a 4th generation Amorah, who was a student of Rav. I think he had Roman numerals 3 in brackets after it, and he was probably the one that was under the bed. And the first one, Rav Kahana Kama, was probably the Rav Kahana who was given the job of judging the case. So I think you're right there, Michael, about that. The two will be 2 different Rav Kahanas, but the same Rav.
According to Rav Steinsaltz, this Rav Kahana was Rav Kahana Kama, the student of Rav. In the Gemarrah in Brochus, Rav Steinsaltz assumes that the Rav Kahana there was Rav Kahana Kama.
That's a bit unusual. I wouldn't have thought that was the case, because Rav Kahana Kama and Rav. Rav
Steinsaltz suggests that he was both a student and a disciple and a contemporary of Rav.
Interesting. Okay, I'm interested to. I would be interested to know why he says that, as opposed to any of the other Rav Kahanas who were also students of Rav. But anyway, that's interesting. You can have that homework, David, to find out why Rav Steinsaltz thinks it was Rav Kahana Kama. Okay.
Unfortunately, we can't ask Rav Steinsaltz anymore.
Sadly not. One of those that we have lost this year. Let's go on to our subject now. We are on verses 16 to 18. Let's remind ourselves of the verses. You should have that on the screen now. Yeah, give me a nod, somebody, if you've got that. Yeah, okay. Right, Leon, off you go. Verses 16 to 18, our well-known verses. Now, you're muted at the moment, Leon. You'll have to unmute.
Right. I instructed your judges at that time, saying, listen among your brethren and judge righteously between a man and his brother or his litigant. You shall not show favoritism in judgment. Small and great alike shall you hear. You shall not tremble before any man, for the judgment is God's. Any matter that is too difficult for you, you shall bring to me, and I shall hear it. I commanded you at that time all the things that you should do.
Okay, so these are our psukim that we've been spending time on, or the Gemara has been spending time on. We've thoroughly looked at verse 16, judging between a man and his brother and his litigant. You'll remember all that with the different types of stove and oven, etc. And last week we talked about this part here. You shall not favor persons in judgment. That's what we were talking about just now in terms of of Rav handing over the case to Rav Kahana. So now we are going to look at the next part of the pasuk in detail, which says katon. There's that little kaf here, where my pointer is here. That's the word that means like, kaf. A kaf at the beginning of a word means like. So katon, like the small, ka gadol, like the great. In other words, small and large alike. Tishma'un, the word in there, and you can see the word shema in there, in the middle of there. Tishma'un, you shall hear. So that's what we're going to start with right now. Those three words are the subject of our Gemarrah this week. So small and great alike, you shall hear. Remember, he's talking to the judges here. So the Gemarrah is now going to ask, what does it mean, small and great alike, you shall hear? Now, before we go to the Gemarrah, I want to take you back in history 40 years from where we are in this pasuk. Remember, this is Sefer Dvarim, chapter 1. Sefer Dvarim, the book of Deuteronomy, is the final speech of Moshe Rabbeinu to the Bnei Israel before his death, as they are standing on the verge of entering the land of Israel, after 40 years wandering in the desert. This is his valedictory speech. So what he's saying, if at the beginning of verse 16, which Leon read out, and I commanded your judges at that time. He's telling them what went on after the Torah was given and the judges were appointed. Now, you'll remember that just a couple of weeks ago, we read about this in its initial form. Here in Dvarim, this is Moshe going over what happened 40 years later. He's telling the next generation, he's telling them, 40 years ago, I commanded your judges then to do this. And part of what I commanded them was to hear small and large cases alike. So what I want to just show you is the original episode from 40 years previously, when the concept of hearing small and large cases alike was first mooted. And I want to show you something slightly different to what we've seen here. You may be aware that if you compare much of what Moshe said in Dvarim to what actually happened originally, there are quite a lot of differences. And the Mefarshim go to town on those differences. And it's a very interesting concept that the passage of 40 years of time gives a completely different perspective on events. This was Moshe 40 years later to a different generation speaking about what happened then. What happened then, but the effect of what happened then may be different for the next generation 40 years later. If you think about that in your own lives, if you think about things that happened 40 years ago to what happens today, you have a completely different perspective on things 40 years ago to what you do today. 40 years ago, some of us at least were still young and vibrant. And 40 years on, we're not quite so young and vibrant, but we are a little bit more mature and a little bit more wise and savvy. So events of 40 years previously will have a different perspective to those that we have today. So I'm going to show you in a second, once Howard has said what he's got to say, I'm going to show you the original version of this idea of judging small and large alike. Yes, Howard?
Well, I was going to say you might be about to demonstrate it, but I was going to ask, how do we know it's a reference to small and great cases as opposed to litigants?
Okay.
In other words, the weak and the strong.
That's a good question. And you'll see the Gemarrah gives us a clue as to what's it about in a minute when we actually get into the Gemarrah. But I want to show you the original psukim first. So let me take you back to Parshat Yitro, chapter 18 of Shemot. You should have that on the screen now. Can you see chapter 18 of Shemot? Yeah. Okay. So where are the verses?
Jonathan, sorry to interrupt you. We've just had a power cut in Renana. So others should be prepared. It was off for about 5 minutes.
Right. Okay. Well, we're glad to have you back. If we get one in Netanya and we all go blank, then you'll know why. So here we go. The story was Yitro came along, and let's read, Leon, if you will, from verse 13 through to verse 13 to verse 26. You've got a lot of reading to do today. Let's read the story of what happened after, well, some say after, some say before, but let's go with the majority view. After the giving of the Torah, this was verse 13 and onwards. Off you go, Leon.
It was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from morning until the evening. The father-in-law of Moses saw everything that he was doing to the people, and he said, "What is this thing that you do to the people? Why do you sit alone with all the people standing by you from morning to evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to seek God. When they have a matter, one comes to me, and I judge between a man and his fellow, and I make known the decrees of God and his teachings." The father-in-law of Moses said to him, "The thing that you do is not good. You will surely become worn out, you as well as this people that is with you. For this matter is too hard for you. You will not be able to do it alone. Now heed my voice. I shall advise you, and may God be with you. You be a representative to God, and you convey the matters to God. You shall caution them regarding the decrees and the teachings, and you shall make known to them the path in which they should go and the deeds that they should do. And you shall discern from among the entire people men of accomplishment, God-fearing people, men of truth, people who despise money, and you shall appoint them leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s and leaders of 10s. They shall judge the people at all times, and they shall bring every major matter to you, and every minor matter they shall judge. And it will be eased for you, and they shall bear with you. If you do this thing and God shall command you, then you will be able to endure, and this entire people as well shall arrive at its destination in peace." Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did everything that he had said. Moses chose men of accomplishment from among all Israel and appointed them heads of the people, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s and leaders of 10s. They judged the people at all times. The difficult thing they would bring to Moses, and the minor thing they themselves would judge. Moses sent off his father-in-law and he went to his land.
Okay, thank you, Leon. Leon will be wanting a raise in a bit. He's had to do so much work this morning. I'll double your wages, Leon.
Thank you.
Right, now, this is where it all started. Yitro, the father-in-law of Moses, of Moshe, saw that Moshe was sat there all day long and everybody was bringing their shilas to him, and he was doing the lot. And he said, "You can't do all this on your own. You need to set up a system of courts, so that higher courts and lower courts." And let's just have a look at this verse here, verse 22. There we go. Let's look at it in the Hebrew, verse 22. V'shaftu et ha'am, and they shall judge the people, b'cholet, at all times. V'haya, and it will be, kol hadavar hagadol, any large matter, gadol, you know, means large or great or big, any large matter, yaviu elecha, they will bring to you. V'chol hadavar hakaton, and every small matter, yishbatu haim, they will judge. So there we have it. So it seems to me that is the original version of what we had in our psukim, which I've taken you back to the screen here. It says, "And I commanded your judges at that time, actually, it wasn't him that commanded them. Well, he was, but it was Yitro's idea. You shall hear the small just as the great. And any case that is too difficult for you, bring to me and I will hear it. Now, anybody notice a bit of a contradiction, not a contradiction, but a bit of a difference between the beginning of this idea and actually what happened in the later verses that Leon read? Anybody would like to point out to me a difference of what actually was said that would be done?
Cemetery.
I would like to ask you about, he said that God was supposed to be, your God will tell you, or something that I heard you say something that related to God. So Yitro gave him the idea, but he said you should check with God. I don't know if Moshe ever did that.
He says, you're quite right. He says, listen to my advice. Where are we? Here we go. Verse 19, Yud-Tet. I'll give you advice. Vihi Elohim imach, and may God be with you. In other words, hopefully God will agree to that. And therefore, and then it says, verse 24, Moses obeyed his father-in-law and he did all that he said, which includes going to ask God whether he thought it was a good idea. So yes, it was given the thumbs up by God. So where is the difference between what Yitro told Moshe to do and what actually happened? Anybody? Okay, let's have a look. Yitro said, verse 22, and it shall be, V'haya ki hadavar hagadol yaviu elecha. The big matters they will bring to you. V'chol hadavar hakaton, and the small matters, yishpatu hein, they will judge. Now, Howard asked, what does it mean by, what did we mean by big and small? Well, it tells us here, hadavar hagadol, the big matter. It doesn't say the big people, the big matter. Now, what does that mean, the big matter or the small matter? Well, I think that a large case or a small case, what this is implying here is the amounts of money, if you like, involved in this thing. The big matter they will bring to you, and the small matter they'll deal with themselves. So a matter, Julia's shaking her head. You can think about it in a sec, Julia, because I'm going to, this is just my hypothesis at the moment. Okay, so hadavar hagadol, the great matter, the large matter, means the multi-million-pound case. The small matter is, like we have in the UK, the small claims court. Up to a certain amount, you can take the case to the small claims court because it's a small claim. That's exactly what that court deals with. So that was the idea. That was the concept that Yitro gave to Moshe. That the large matters, the multi-million-pound cases, or the multi-million-dollar cases for the Americans, or the multi-zillion rand cases, because the rand's not worth very much, so you need zillions of rands to make it a big case. Go to the higher court, go to Moshe, and the small claims court is run by the lower judges. That seems to be the idea that Yitro suggested to Moshe. Let's have a look and see what actually happened. And so here we go. Moses chose the men of substance, and he got them all. And verse 26, and they judged the people at all times. Et hadavar hakasheh yaviun el Moshe. The difficult case. Kasher means difficult, yeah? What's a kasha? Johnny Halpern, you got a good kasha? What's a kasha?
Question.
A difficulty, a question.
Yeah, that's a hard question.
A hard question. And if you say, chayim kashim li, it means I've got a hard life. Kasher means hard, okay? So the hard case they brought to Moshe. The small case, hakaton yishpatuhein, the small case they judged. There's a change here between what Yitro said. Yitro said, bring the gadol case, the large case to Moshe. And in fact, they brought the hard case to Moshe. And what that means is that it might only have been a small amount of money. But if the concepts were difficult, if this was a case which needed a higher authority, a greater legal expertise, a greater closeness to God to know what the halacha was, it doesn't matter whether it was a small amount or a large amount. If it was difficult, it went to Moshe. Not so. So the original concept was that the big cases, the multi-million-dollar, pound, rand cases, went to Moshe, and the small amounts went to the lower court. Whereas what in fact happened, and this was what Moshe did, he was more interested not in the value of the case, but actually in the difficulty of the case. Meaning that even if it was a small amount, and it didn't matter that it was only a small amount, if it needed Moshe's expertise, then it got Moshe's expertise. Moshe wasn't saying, I am not concerning myself with this matter because it's only about a few shekels. He said, no, if it's a difficult case, I will deal with it. And this here is the concept that he then says in his speech, which is our psukim. He tells the judges, great and small amounts you shall judge. Here we are. You shall hear the small just as the great. According to Yitro, those judges weren't going to hear the great cases, the gadol cases, because according to Yitro's original advice, the big cases were going to go to Moshe. Moshe is consistent here with what he actually did, not with what the pure advice of Yitro was. The pure advice of Yitro was that Moshe would deal with the big cases because they were big cases, and that needs Moshe. Moshe says, no, you're going to hear the big cases as well, but you have to hear the big cases in the same way as the small cases, or the small cases as way the big cases. I'm going to do the difficult ones, because he says that. Look at our verse later on. V'hadavar asher yikshe mikem, same word, kasher. Can you see that word kasher in there? Those things that are too difficult for you, whether it's a penny or £1 million, you bring them to me. Takrivon elai, bring them to me, ushma ativ, and they will be, and I will hear them. So Moshe is consistent with his actions and not with the pure advice that Yitro gave him. What that shows you is that whilst Moshe accepted the concept that Yitro gave him, which is that he had to share out the burden of judging the cases, he did not fully take on Yitro's advice. He adapted it, he refined it, he made it better. He took it to a higher moral level, in that it was the difficulty of the case which gets the higher authority and the bigger brain, if you like, rather than the value. And he stresses that by our psukim here in Dvarim, when he's speaking to the next generation, he stresses that it is not the value of the case which means that I should hear it. I'm not just going to hear the high profile cases because it's a big monetary value. I will hear the difficult cases, and you guys have to listen to all the cases that are within your capability, and you have to give the small case just as much attention as the large case. And that's where our Gemarrah is coming from. That's the background to our Gemarrah. So I think that the first thing that we can learn before we even get to the Gemarrah, and as usual, we've managed to get through the majority of the shiur without even looking at the Gemarrah, because And I make no apologies for that, because as I've said to you many times, and for the benefit of Eva, who's first time in, you cannot learn Gemara without knowing Chumash. You cannot learn Gemara without knowing Tanakh, and the way to learn Gemara is where the psukim take you. That is where you go. And if it takes you 15 months to do 7 pages, well, then so be it. So the first thing we learn here is that Moshe had the ability to take on board, had the humility to take on board advice from somebody else, but he also had the greatness to adapt it, to give it a higher moral standing than it originally had. And that combination of humility and high moral standing is what stood Moshe out as the great leader that he was. And I think just in these few ideas, these few psukim in Shemot that we've just read, there they are back on the screen, it would be easy for us to skip over that just as a little indication of how justice systems should be set up. But hidden in there is a moral lesson. It's a leadership lesson. It's a lesson that those people who find themselves in positions of leadership can learn from the greatest leader of all time, of Moshe Rabbeinu, that never be too big to take advice from somebody else, and never be too small to adapt that and refine it and take it to a higher moral level. So that's the lesson from those psukim. Let's have a look.
Did the litigant have an opportunity? Did the litigant have an opportunity to decide that they wanted to have their case heard by Moshe and not by some? Because it sounds like all the judges had the priority of what to do, rather than the litigant. Yeah. Maybe.
I suspect, Nachum, that's correct, because otherwise the system would be unworkable. If everybody had a choice of which level of court they went to, everybody would want to go to Moshe Rabbeinu, wouldn't they? And we'd be back to square one. So I suspect that it was probably a hierarchy. It would go to the lower court. The lower court would decide whether it was able to deal with this. Because remember, Moshe says to them, any case that's too hard for you, bring it to me. So I suspect that it probably worked its way up the hierarchy of courts, rather than the litigants choosing which court they could go to, because I don't think that would be workable. Anybody, any other ideas on that point?
Well, it is workable, because if you have a case in a lower court in the United States and you want to bring it, and you've gotten a decision and you want to appeal it, you can take it all the way up to the Supreme Court, which would be Moshe.
That's true, but you don't get a chance to take it to the Supreme Court in the first instance, do you?
Well, it could, but not likely.
No, you can't.
You would have to go
with
through
very
the steps.
few exceptions.
Yeah,
with very few exceptions, you cannot. Very few between states. Only between states, not an individual case like in Israel.
So in the United States, if you have a case allocated to a particular court, then you may or may not be allowed to appeal to a higher court, correct?
You normally have an automatic right to appeal to a higher court, that is the Court of Appeals in the federal system. The Supreme Court has discretion whether or not to take it. And even the appellate courts, the intermediate court, can reject the appeal with what's called a per curiam decision.
And Howard, I assume that's a similar system in the UK. You're muted, Howard. Howard, you're muted. Okay. Howard, yeah, there you
go. You certainly can't go directly to the Supreme Court now.
Yeah. So I think Nachum, the answer to your question is that it would have been started with the lower courts, and the courts would be the ones that, according to this and according to the Chumash, the courts would be the one that sent it upstairs if it didn't feel it could deal with it. Whether there was a system of appeals or not, I suspect there probably was. I don't know. Maybe we'll learn that later on in Sanhedrin. I don't know. Can't remember the whole of it. And we may not ever get to it. But anyway, we'll see. Yes, Marcel.
We're not actually talking in this instance about an appeal. We're talking about the fact that that it was beyond the capacity of the judges to deal with it.
That's right. I think that we're dealing about two different things. That's just what I said to Nachum, that the litigant themselves would be allocated to a particular level of court. If that particular level of court said, no, it's too hard for me, we'll go up the chain until it got to Moshe. That's how I think the system worked. Let's have a look at the Gemarrah now. I have to stop sharing and then reshare once I've got the Gemarrah on the screen. Give me a moment. There we go. And I will now reshare. Okay, there we go. We've got the Gemarrah back on the screen now. So the Gemarrah says like this, quotes our pasuk, kakaton kagadol tishmaon. You can see that's quoting our pasuk. It's in quotation marks there. The Gemarrah continues to interpret clauses from our verse. You shall hear the small and the great alike. Amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, Sheyehei chaviv alecha din shel pruta kedin shel mea maneh. Sheyehei chaviv alecha. It should be alecha to you, chaviv. What does the word chaviv mean?
Like Lieberman, loved.
Exactly. I was hoping you would say that, Marcel. I was wondering who would get in there first, Marcel or Jeffrey. Chaviv means dear. And how does Marcel know that straight away? Because we have a cousin who has the same name as me, Yaakov, who came from Romania to Israel before the state was established. I'm not sure exactly which year. Marcel might know which year. But it was before the state, and he was called Yaakov Lieberman. And when he came to Israel, he wanted to Hebraicize his name, so he changed his name to Yaakov Chaviv, because Chaviv means beloved or dear. Chavibi, you might hear in the street somebody might call you, hey Chabibi. Chabibi means my dear fellow. Chaviv means dear. And of course, Lieberman, mein lieber Mann in German, means my dear fellow. So what Yaakov Lieberman did was he changed his name. He made it the Hebrew version of Lieberman, which was Chaviv. Yaakov Chaviv today is, I think, about 90. He's still with us. He ended his career as chief of police of Haifa. He was a very senior policeman. He was the chief constable of Haifa, a very impressive man. And his name is Yaakov Chaviv. Chaviv means Lieberman. And here, Marcel's quite right. Sheyehei Chaviv alecha. It should be dear to you. Din shel pruta, a judgment of a pruta. What's a pruta? Anybody know what a pruta is?
Small, like an agora.
Yeah, it's a penny. It's the smallest. Yeah, it's the smallest denomination of coin that there is. It's one pruta. It's the smallest amount. So here it would be one agora or a cent or a penny. That should be as important to you, kedin shel mea maneh, as a judgment of 100 maneh. What's a maneh? It's a lot of money. Maneh is a lot of money. Let's have a look what we've got over here. Huge sum of money. I'm wondering whether, here we go. The pruta, I'm on the Steinsaltz explanation. Those of you who've got the Gemarrah in front of you, those of you who haven't, it's on the screen. The pruta was the coin of the smallest denomination. 1 dinar was worth the equivalent of 192 prutot. A maneh is worth 100 dinars. Therefore, 100 maneh is the equivalent of almost 2 million prutot. So I'm very happy that Rav Steinsaltz did the maths for me, because I was going to go and try and work it out for you, the difference between a pruta and 100 maneh. and I don't need to do it because he's done it for us. So what Reish Lakish is saying in our Gemara over here is that you should give as much care and attention as a judge to a case worth 1 penny or 1 cent or 1 agura as it would to 2 million pennies or agura. In other words, a huge amount of money. It doesn't matter. And this is exactly the concept that Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching us with that subtle change of language that I showed you from Parshat Yitro. That the judges must take as much care. Don't think that, oh, this is only a small amount of money and therefore I don't need to give it as much care. No, the verse is telling us, kakaton, kagadol. Deal with the small cases in exactly the same way as you would with the great cases. In other words, take as much care as you would with a large case as with a small case. Just as an aside, where might you have heard the word pruta before? Those of you who have ever been married will have heard that word at least once in your life. You might not remember it because it wasn't necessarily the most important thing in your mind at that time.
And the ketubah.
Okay.
You have to
say that
for
again, Johnny.
Ketubah. And the ketubah.
Not quite, but you're on the right lines. You're on the right lines. Yes, Howard.
You have to give, I think Johnny means the same thing. You have to pay something for the ketubah.
Again, you're on the right lines, but
no, you have to give, if anything happens to the marriage, you have to pay compensation.
You do, but that's usually not talking about prutot. That's usually talking about higher amounts. David Marks.
The item that you have to give to acquire your wife has to have a value of a pruta, shaveh pruta.
Correct, shaveh pruta has to be. Now, today, that means the ring.
The ring.
Both on the right lines, talking about the wedding ceremony. Yeah. The ring that you give to your bride, which actually acquires the marriage, which sanctifies the marriage, has to be worth at least a pruta. You can't give something which has no value. It has to have some value. So what happens is, at the chuppah, you probably didn't hear it, but the Mesader Kiddushin, the person who is conducting the wedding, will ask the witnesses, the two Eidim, the two witnesses, to do two things. They have to look at the ring, and they have to agree that this ring is worth at least a pruta. So if it was made out of paper, they would say, no, that is not worth a pruta, it's not worth anything, and therefore that is not a halachically acceptable ring to give to your wife, so it won't work. So they have to look at the ring, and they have to satisfy themselves that it is worth a pruta. The second thing they have to do is they actually have to witness the ring being put on the finger of the bride. So you might think that when you are a witness, any of you who have ever been a witness at a chuppah, Eidei Kiddushin it's called, the witnesses are to the Kiddushin, you may think that the main job you have to do is to witness the ring being put on, which is true, but you also have to confirm and be happy that the ring itself is worth a pruta, and the person conducting will say to you, "Shaveh pruta?" ? Do you agree that this is worth a pruta? And you will answer, "Shaveh pruta." It's worth a pruta. And you actually have to, as a witness, you actually have to verbally confirm that you agree. You've seen this ring, you've examined this ring, and you are happy that it is worth a pruta. So that is where you will have heard that word pruta, but you may not remember it. Yes, Sharon or Larry.
Just a thought, and it's obvious, I'm sure, to all of us, but Larry and I have often discussed the importance of the judge in small claims court or the judge in traffic court being as venerable as a Supreme Court justice. because for the greatest number of people, that is their encounter with the system of justice. That is their opportunity to have their dignity reaffirmed and to have the dignity of the system that they're trusting into their governance to being reaffirmed. And I think it's just beautifully stated here. Thank you for this journey.
So that's absolutely right. And of course, I was going to ask you to define the word venerable, but I don't think I need to because you've explained it. You're absolutely right. Most people's encounters will be with the lower court. Most people don't ever, thankfully, get to the Supreme Court or the higher courts. It's accepted that those people in the Supreme Courts and the higher courts ought to be the most knowledgeable of the law because that's what they're applying. But in terms of the quality of the judge, we only need to go back. I'm not going to go back to the psukim now because I have to start unsharing and resharing. But you'll remember the qualities that were asked of these judges. They had to be people who were honest and decent, people who weren't going to take bribes, people who were upright. And he did not make a distinction. Moshe or Yitro did not make a distinction that the lower court judges had to be less venerable, less honorable, less susceptible to bribes. They all had to be the same. So the point here of kakaton, kagadol tishmaon is the origins of that absolute need to hear justice, whether it is a small case or a large case, and not to deal with a case in a different way because it's only a small amount of money. So the Gemarrah asks a question now, and this is another typical Gemarrah type of question which you will encounter a lot. The Gemarrah says, fine, that's what Reish Lakish says. Lemai hilchata. With what halacha? What's he talking about here? He says. The Gemarrah says, why is he pointing this out? Ilema, if you will say, le'ayunei bei umifsakei, if you will say that he needs to study it, the word iyun. Have you ever heard of a yom iyun, a study day? You often have those study days. In fact, there's a study day coming up for Purim on Sunday. Those of you who are interested, there is a Yom Iyun in Web Yeshiva, which I attend. That's where I did my smicha through Rav Brovinder's yeshiva. And they're having a Yom Iyun, a day of study about Purim on Sunday. That's where this word comes from, Iyune. If you'll say they have to study it, umifsake, and then give it their judgment, pshita, that's obvious. Why would you have to tell me that? It's obvious that a person has to judge a small case with the same diligence and the same study as a large case. Surely we don't need to be taught that, says the Gemarrah. It must be, Reish Lakish must be saying something else here. It can't be to how careful you are with the case, because that's obvious. So the Gemarrah suggests, Ella, rather, la'ak dumei. It's talking about the order in which you hear the cases. As Rosh Steinsaltz puts, with regard to giving it precedence, the small claims case may not be deferred in favor of the large claim merely because the disputed sum is smaller. So in other words, you lodge a case at court and your case is only a small amount of money and you're due to be heard next week. Some other case comes along after yours, which is a big amount of money. The court is not allowed to say, I'm going to put aside this small case because it's not as important as the big case, and I'll hear the big case first. That is what the Gemarrah is suggesting at this point, is the point that Reish Lakish is making, that you cannot defer a small case in favor of a large case. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would the Gemarrah suggest that a judge needs to be warned against doing that any more than a judge would be warned against not studying the case properly? Why would a judge want to defer a small case over a large case? Any suggestions? Not you, Leon, because you've read the notes in the art scroll, so you can go last when everybody else has had a go.
I think ego, the ego of the judge, the kind of excitement that he would have to have something much more important in the public's eye and his own colleagues' eye. Just ego.
Yeah, I think that worked. It's not what the footnotes say in the art scroll Gemarrah, but I think that's right, Nachum. I think there is definitely an ego issue there. I've never been a judge, and I wouldn't like to be one. But yeah, everybody likes a crowd, don't they? Everybody likes an audience. Everybody likes to be involved in being a knacker. So yeah, I think that ego is definitely involved in that. Any other suggestions as well as ego? Any others? All right, Leon, tell us.
Well, he doesn't get a salary. The judge doesn't get a salary. And what compensation he does receive for judging the case is commensurate with the value of the matter in dispute. So he would be inclined to deal with a case first that it gives him a bit more cash in hand, so to speak.
Yes.
And that's one opinion.
Let's just deal with that opinion first before you come to the second opinion. Let's just deal with that opinion. So what Leon is saying there, which is quoted in the footnote, who quotes it there, Leon? Does he quote who it's from? Does he quote who it's from?
The Maharsha.
The Maharsha. Okay. So what the Maharsha is saying is this: that the judges were not given a salary. They weren't given, 10,000 shekels a month or whatever it was. Each case that they heard, they got a percentage of whatever the deal was from each side. They would get the same percentage from the winner and the loser, so that there wouldn't be any issue there. But they got a percentage of the sum claimed. It's a bit like an estate agent, right? An estate agent that is on a percentage, say 1% or 2% of the cost, they're going to be much more interested in selling a 10 million shekel house than they are a 5,000 shekel shed, because they're only going to get 1% of 5,000 is a lot less than 1% of 10 million. So they're going to give more effort to trying to sell the bigger property. And that was the way that the judges were recompensed for their time, is that they got a percentage of the claim. So it would be understandable, I'll come to you in a sec, Julia, it would be understandable that the judge, as well as the ego aspect that Nachum correctly raises, it would be understandable that the judge would say, right, well, I've got two cases here. One's for a pruta and one's for 2 million pruta, 100 maneh. I'm on 1%. Well, a pruta, I can't get 1% of a pruta because 1% of a pruta is nothing. So I'm not going to bother with that. I'll do the other case first. And when I've got time and there's something else, nothing else on, then I'll do the pruta case. And this is a warning against that being happening. That is a warning against for the judge not to do such a thing. So that's the idea. Howard, no, first Julia first. You're unmuted, Julia. You're muted.
Doesn't that contradict what we read before about the appointment of the judges, where they say they should be men who despise monetary gain.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. But I think what the Gemarrah acknowledges is that it's actually impossible to completely despise monetary gain, because at the end of the day, if that's the way you're paid and you have to put money on, you have to put bread on the table, then and you could argue, of course, that that is a fault in the system and that they should be paid a salary, and then this wouldn't happen. But it seems that the way it worked is that they were paid a percentage of the thing, and therefore they were open to this, even though they really, had they fulfilled their criteria as they should. Bear in mind, by the way, Ravi Do worked it out, that if you have judges of 10, judges of 100, judges of 1,000, and judges of 10,000, you end up with a population of 600,000 adult males. You end up with something like, I can't remember the figure, but it was about 180,000 judges. So where you're going to find 180,000 people who despise monetary gain, it's just practically not going to happen. So what that is telling us, Julia, is the ideal, and what the Gemarrah is telling us is the practicality of the matter.
You're only dealing with monetary cases, aren't you, Johnny?
We're talking about monetary cases here, yes, yes. Okay. Yes, Howard.
Well, just for fun, on the question of a kasher, let me tell you of an old legal maxim, which is hard cases make bad law. And there's actually some very good examples of that in English law. It's just something for you to ruminate on.
Hard cases make bad law. In other words, if you take precedent from hard cases, you're going to get bad law. Is that what you mean?
From an extreme case, for example, and a judgment is made, it may not apply to many other cases. It may not be.
I understand that concept, and actually, if you think about halakha, most of halakha is based on hard cases, and I would argue that hard cases make bad law should be applied more. This is my bit of heresy for the day. Should be applied more across halakha than it is, because what you often find is that because in an extreme case certain thing might happen, therefore something is bad. For example, in an extreme case, somebody may come to pick up a knife and slaughter an animal which is forbidden on Shabbat. So therefore, the rabbis brought in the whole concept of mukta, because you might come to pick up a knife and slaughter an animal. Hard cases make bad law. I would suggest that we see quite a lot of that, not in halakha, but in the way halakha is applied. I have no argument with halakha. I have an argument sometimes in the way the halakha is interpreted. Wanted to get that in first before my heresy.
Before you end up like Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs.
Yeah, before I get put in the wrong camp there. Yes. Okay. So time up as usual. We've gone over time. So I think that's a nice place to stop. What have we learned today? Just to summarize, we've learned the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, his humility, and his ability to rise above things and to increase the moral aspect of what he was taught. We've learned that judges are human beings and are susceptible to their own ego, and they are susceptible to money, despite the fact that they should not be. It's human nature to be so. And the Gemarrah warns us from our psukim in the Torah that judges should do their very utmost to rise above that and to judge the small in the same way as they should the large. Any questions before we wrap up? Yes, David.
Yeah, a couple of observations. First of all, on the last point the Gemarrah was discussing, the Torah brings the halacha that when it comes to judgment, when there's a court register, as it were, it should be on a first come, first served basis. Therefore, no priority should be given, whether it's a large case, small case, or whoever, with one exception. And the Balaturim brings the word Tishma'un only appears twice in the whole of Tanakh, here and in connection with a Navi later on in Parshat Ra'eh. And he extrapolates from that if you've got a Talmid Chacham, he should go first in the queue if there is a queue for a monetary case, which is interesting. But I think more importantly, can I not challenge you, but give you a different spin on the way that you interpreted, which is the standard interpretation of the Psukim in Yitro, with the Moshe stressing at the end, or the Torah stressing that the more difficult cases went to Moshe, and the easier cases went to the people, well, also went to the appointed judges. I read an unbelievable Dvar Torah a couple of weeks ago for Parashat Yitro. In fact, it was on Parashat B'Shalach, which is very appropriate for Shabbat Zachor, which we're coming on to in a few days' time. The juxtaposition of three stories in the Torah: Amalek, which is immediately preceded by the story of the water at Rephidim, when there was no water for the people to drink, and immediately followed by the story of Yitro. What's the connection between the three? At Rephidim, Hashem tells Moshe to take the staff, the mater, that he'd used to do the plagues of Mitzrayim and perform the miracle there of water coming out of the rock. The next story is Moshe going up the mountain with that same staff without being told by Hashem how to defeat Amalek. Therefore, Moshe goes up on the first day of this 2-day war against Amalek without the permission, without the instruction of Hashem. And as a result, initially, Amalek succeeds. The third story with Yitro, that Moshe on his own says that he's going to take the more difficult cases for himself. According to the Ibn Ezra, the juxtaposition of this is a criticism of Moshe. And we'll see this criticism in your share in a couple of weeks' time on the same daf that we're on now, where this is not Moshe's normal humility. It runs against his humility. Moshe should have, in the case of Amalek, said, waited for Hashem's instructions on how to deal with Amalek, instead of automatically assuming that the staff that he performed miracles with on God's command was going to do the same job against Amalek. Similarly, Moshe should have recognized that the more difficult cases, he would have to ask Hashem himself. So he should have expressed the fact that he would ask Hashem. And you'll see, you probably already learned it ahead, how Moshe is humiliated with certain cases which he's unable to paskin himself, and he has to go to Hashem. So according to the Ibn Ezra, this is an amazing explanation of the juxtaposition of the three stories.
Thank you for that. We will get to that in a couple of weeks, where we see, we'll park that for the moment, because I have a retort to that, because I've also read that Ibn Ezra, and I think he's very harsh on Moshe. And you all know me, I'm all up for criticizing our leaders when they need to be criticized. But I think that's harsh on Moshe. And I think the Gemarrah that we're going to learn in a week or two, in just a few lines actually, initially is harsh, and then we see that actually somebody else supports him. So we'll leave that for the moment. That's just a taster of what's to come. But David just reminded me, we can stop recording now, Avril, if you don't mind. David's just reminded me that it is Parashat Zachor on Shabbat. It is